Come on, Data. You can do this. You can do this, Data. All right, I think we should be starting up now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the XFL Strategy Show here for Awesemo.com. Hopefully, it's going out to all of you guys right now because this is my first time producing a stream for us, and Lord knows I am greatly incompetent in a variety of ways, but not in DFS. We'll talk about that, of course. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who's going to really help out the competency of this show, Mr. Sal Vetri, better known as @Sal Vetri DFS. How are you doing, Sal?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I'm excited for this. You said we're going on a voyage today with you producing. It should be a fun one.
It is a maiden voyage, Sal. You're in on the ground floor. And you know what? One other way to get in on the ground floor of the XFL product right now is to go over to awesemo.com/join and use the promo code XFL2020. I think it's still going right now. If it isn't, my apologies, but get the package anyway, either way at awesemo.com/join right now. Oh, fuck. I'm getting messages from Josh telling me that you're echoing a little bit. So let me see. I would fix that. But Sal, I guess talk real fast about our XFL product because we have ownership projections and data, and I want to make sure you're sounding right to get those beautiful dulcet tones out there.
Yeah, I mean, the ownership's going to be the big thing. You just have only 4 games a week at this point, and you saw it after week one. People really leveraged what they saw in week one, and some of that made sense, but you had three quarterback changes due to injuries, and really just Murray not playing last week, and then both Johnson and Jones coming back. So it really was hard to rely on that. You're going to have stable quarterback play this week, the same guys as last week coming in, but it's still a 1 week sample. So the ownership's one of the bigger things. And we'll talk about quarterbacks first. The quarterback position is really hard, I would say, to pick apart this week since they're all priced up to that 10K range, or really the 4 or 5 that you would want to get to the most and feel good about their offenses. So when it comes to ownership, if you see one being significantly lower owned and there's really not that difference of a projection, that would be a guy to jump on that just the field's not going to have that information.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, look, Sal knows it better than anybody as a man who's covered a lot of sports, including some of the new ones out there. The XFL is about as new as it can get. And actually, our editor-in-chief over at Awesemo, Nolan Kelly, sent me in a little bit of a detailed Twitter thread from a guy. Actually, you know what? I'll post it in the YouTube chat because I do think it's an interesting thing to talk about. Sal, have you seen this controversy at all with, I guess, the XFL statistics maybe not measuring up to what PFF has? There's a guy here. What's his name?
I think I've been messaging DraftKings and FanDuel just like on Twitter DMs because I requoted it, just kind of agreeing with the one statistic the guy was calling out. Then somebody reached out to me about things going on FanDuel scoring. So they use third-party scorings, but it seems to be different because FanDuel and DraftKings are having different issues. They really didn't resolve anything. I wasn't asking them to resolve contests for me, but I was just telling them to let them know that there's issues going on. So last week, it was DeAndre Tompkins. He made his return. He was credited for 92 receiving yards. I had him at around anywhere from 66 to 68, depending on how you saw him being tackled in those games. PFF had him at, I think, 67. That gentleman who called out on Twitter had him at, like, I think 66. So it was pretty clear that he was in that range. I think they credited him for a 25-yard reception that he didn't have. Like, it was an incomplete pass, something like that. But the one that was really concerning, and I saw it when I was just kind of cross-checking what I kind of had charted down with PFF, Simi Cobbs last week was credited for a 70-yard reception that Cardell Jones also got credit for on a 14-yard catch, and it was never corrected. So that's like almost a 6-point swing in GPPs if you have Cobb. And I don't know where the finishing results were with like him in lineups, but you take a situation where if Cobb ended up being in the winning lineup, I don't know if he was on FanDuel, he wasn't on DraftKings. That's a guy who had 5 more points than he should have had. And as of right now, I don't think there's any resolution. So yeah, it seems to be that the third-party system that they're using, the NFL, like the XFL's actual website, if you're looking at the stats there, it's a lot of those things are not that accurate.
Yeah, it's not the best. And, we talked about it earlier, and, we don't have any sort of marketing deal with PFF, but they do a really good job making sure the stats are accurate. And unfortunately, that I think this is something that's going to be the growing pains you have with a new league. But PFF's data is still pretty solid across the board and a lot of great insight. So we would still recommend using that if you are trying to get XFL data in your life. And we will talk about a lot of it as we go today. I guess, Sal, what would you do in that situation if you are the guy who is pretty tilted over Simi Cobbs not getting a catch or one of these guys? I think you just have to take it, right? There's really nothing you can do in that kind of situation other than complain and hope your prayers get answered by some power great beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just voice the concerns. Like, I'm sure if I had, like, say I finished second place in DraftKings tournament, I'm assuming they pay like, what, 40 grand or something like that the second. And I missed out on $100,000, 60 grand in difference. yeah, I would be sure to try and take some sort of action. I don't know how in depth I would go, but I mean, I didn't finish second place because of that. But I'm sure there was a good amount of people who ended up getting edged out because of an extra 3 points going to Tompkins, who was a not a popular play, but 3% of the field owns him. Cobb's not a popular play. He ended up getting 6 more points than he should have. But those are just some situations. There's a lot of situations like the NFL. You usually see if you chart plays. I did it in the preseason, but you usually see like a 1 to 2 yard difference sometimes. But when it's like stands out for like a 54 yard difference, then there's obviously some sort of red flag. So I think they got lucky because one, it's the XFL, not as many people are paying attention, but two, it was two really low owned players that probably didn't change the effects of contests all that much. But Cardell Jones was, I would say, 20+% owned, and he ended up with 2 more points than he should have had at the end of it, 2.5 more points.
Yeah, so something definitely not the most ideal, but again, growing pains, these things do happen. As much like a person learning to produce on the fly for the first time, the XFL is doing that every single day with a variety of things, and I'm sure things will get buttoned up as we go. And there is still a bit of an edge, obviously, that we can find here, and one of the edges may just be playing guys and hoping their stats are wrong. So we'll try to target that this week. We do have another series of 4 games here, and again, another week of data too that's going to be helpful just to get some insights. That's why we do have the ownership projections now at Osmo.com. So again, if you want to get that XFL package, go to Osmo.com/join and try to use that promo code XFL 2020 if you can. Not sure if it's still available, but give it a shot. I think if you do, it's a pretty good savings on there. But let's talk about game 1, Sal. We got the team who's really been the highest potency offense so far. A guy who was a chalk QB last week, though we did nail Jordan Ta'amu, or damn it, I already forgot how we're supposed to pronounce his name. We did nail him as being the pivot to Walker, but Philip Walker, the quarterback du jour of the league, really the guy who should be the star. Houston's offense, really the main star of the league, and some injury issues, though. Guys been missing practice this week, Sal. I saw Cam Phillips is out earlier in the week. Haven't gotten a chance to check on everything for practice yesterday. But how are we feeling about Houston's passing attack here? Any news and notes about their side?
Yeah, so Cam Phillips was able to log, I believe it was last night. They came out with the reports, though, a day later today. Was able to log a full practice yesterday. Sammy Coates as well. So the receivers should be good to go. They're going to miss for a second straight week here D'Angelo Henderson, who was a backup running back. So you'll end up mainly getting Andre Williams and James Butler in the backfield there. So neither of those guys are appealing. But Philip Walker, priced all the way up to 11,500. You're just getting a really stable floor. But I think his floor is similar to what you get out of a guy like Cardell Jones and some of these other quarterbacks. So I mentioned like these quarterback prices are all bulked up to the top. This is a week where week 1, last week with Ta'amu and Walker, it was just between them for me starting my lineups. This week, I'm more curious in trying to just get my wide receivers first, then my running backs, and then see what I have left over at quarterback, because I think a lot of these guys, just pure projection wise, and when you factor in price, a lot of them are going to look similar. So I would prioritize wide receiver and then probably quarterback this week. So Walker, yeah, I think he looks fine at 11,500. But if he's capping you from getting to a next tier or confidence level at wide receiver, then I'm completely fine going down to one of the 4 quarterbacks below him.
Yeah, I mean, we saw last week. I mean, St. Louis's secondary, a pretty decent one. At least they looked good in week 1. And then going against Houston, we did kind of see them impede things enough. I mean, Walker had a good day, still had the touchdowns, still had the results overall, but the yardage wasn't there from as much. I kind of worry that Tampa Bay is a similar situation where their secondary so far has looked pretty decent. Not a great PFF grade on them, but I did think they did some nice things in the 2 games they've had so far. Certainly last week was a bit of a disaster for both sides for Tampa Bay. But any concerns for you with Houston? Like, are you buying into Cam Phillips being this highly priced, where he's been the guy who's getting there? But we've talked about him since since we previewed week 1. He's not a burner. He's not a guy who's that fast. And, Sammy Coates has done nothing with the opportunity, saw less routes in week 2. But are you willing to trust Cam Phillips at 11K, where I feel like that's a really trappy price point. And if he doesn't excel there, if the slot guys do better, Nick Holley or Khalil Lewis have some more success, it does seem like Cam Phillips could get squeezed out in a way that people won't be expecting.
Yeah, and I think the big thing for Cam Phillips at this point is he played 98% of the snaps last week and 100% of the snaps week 1. All of these other wide receivers are rotating in. So whether it's 3 wide receiver sets, Holly and Lewis come in and out for each other. And actually, you're getting a lot of Holly on the field as of late, played just as many snaps as Phillips last week. But then you had just a rotating door at the other outside wide receiver position with Sammy Coates going in and out of the game for just numerous amounts of receivers, 2 or 3 guys behind him, Sam Mobley being one of them. So I think you just get the most security in what looks like the most pass-friendly offense. Now, they're not passing just pure percentage-wise the most in the league, but it's very close. They're passing around 60% of the time at this point, 65% of the time. So you get a lot of upside for a guy who's always on the field. And it does look like there's a connection. 18 targets, the second most in the league right now for him. And the thing is, like, he's not going to score probably a touchdown every single week. He's definitely not going to score 3 like he did last week. So the price point's coming up on him. Yeah, I don't think you have to play him, but in a league where it looks like there's half the league has shaky quarterback play and receivers to go with it, and then there's just not a lot of consistency, he's one of the 1 to 3 wide receivers that offers that consistency level. So I'm completely fine getting back to him. It's just a matter of you got to get different elsewhere. Like trying to play Phillips, Spruce, and everybody else that people are going to play in the tournament is probably not going to work out. So I think he's a really strong play in cash. In GPPs, I have really no issues getting away from him if he's going to play right now 99% of the snaps so far.
Are you willing to go to Sammy Coates again? Because we have talked about him at length, and for me in particular, he has been an albatross in my lineup so far the last 2 weeks. And granted, a smarter man might have moderated his exposure in week 2 after what he did in week 1, but I play with my heart, Sal. I have all the data at my fingertips, and ultimately that's all you can do is go with your gut. Sammy Coates had the opportunity in week 1. Week 2, he saw less. He's been catching the ball to 23% catch rate, which that'd do for positive regression, even if he's the worst receiver in the league. And he's not. I mean, he's played in the NFL. He's fast. Are you trusting Sammy Coates at all? I mean, it does seem like a week where if you were going to go to him instead of Cam Phillips, that offers theoretical opportunity. But after how much money he's cost a lot of people out there, I could see if maybe you wouldn't, even though I'm going to assume you're willing to go back there at least a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I was right there with you last week. I went right back to him, and the issue with him last week wasn't that. I mean, he only saw 4 targets, but he just wasn't staying on the field. He only played 62% of the snaps. They actually had Jackson, who rotated in, playing 40% of the snaps, running 15 routes to Coates 22. So if that's going to be the case, and it's really hard to judge moving forward, there was no. It could have been something injury related. He popped up on the injury report earlier in the week, but if you're only going to get 20 routes out of Sammy Coates at 7,700, yeah, people are probably going to start jumping off of him. So it gives you lower ownership there, but it's just not great usage relative to the team and then the rest of the league. So running 22 routes last week, people filling in for him, being a full participant at the price point, it's okay to get to, but I'm probably going to steer away from it this week just because some of these other offenses have guys in that same price range that just have better roles.
How are you feeling about James Butler? Because he does keep finding the end zone, but this Houston team really does not want to run the ball at all. They're running at one of the lowest rush rates in the league, 31.4% for them so far. Butler's been getting there, and there's in a passing offense that has success. Obviously, running backs trying to get some decent looks. Nobody else is pushing him for touches, really. Are you willing to go to Butler? Because to me, at his price point, I just don't see it this week. And it seems like if he doesn't get a touchdown, I mean, he got a touchdown last week, and he still was barely viable. I just don't see the appeal going to him again this week.
Yeah, I really don't see the appeal. That's the first thing that I noticed right when the salaries came out was just like how ridiculously priced he was. It's clearly a factor of them just pricing this entire offense up. But so you're still going to have no Henderson out, or Henderson's not going to be there. He's out again, so that's good. But he only played 65% of the snaps. He's only ran 22 routes this whole year. Has no runs of 15 plus. Just 9 total touches last week. Ended up having 2 receptions for 25 yards. So it's just not good usage, or 2 receptions for -3 yards. It's just not good usage overall for him. 25 total yards. Yeah, so $8,500 is a really big stretch. I mean, I would have to know at 8,500 that you're probably going to play around 70% of the snaps like you did last week, but being an offense that wants to run the ball, something like St. Louis, and have an upside for 15 plus touches. In this offense, they've shown no really interest in running the ball at all. So far in the season, I believe they've only targeted their running backs 4 total times. So yeah, at $8,500, it's going to be just a full fade for me.
All right, let's talk about this Tampa Bay side where Aaron Murray was out last week, and the people left behind for Tampa Bay, Taylor Cornelius in particular, just did not have anything at all to offer there. Quentin Flowers barely got any opportunity as well. He was rotating in, but just it wasn't anything close to a 50-50 timeshare in terms of the pass game opportunity. Aaron Murray, the last that I saw, he wasn't practicing. I'm not sure if he's been officially ruled out or not yet, but Sal, do you have any news on actually? They have Aaron Murray listed as a cornerback on the injury report, unless it's a different Aaron Murray, but it does say he's out. So I'm going to assume that's the actual Aaron Murray at quarterback. But Sal, Aaron Murray out again? Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I saw the cornerback thing too, but yeah, he was ruled out. Him and so Aaron Murray and Nick Truesdell are going to be out for Tampa Bay in this one. And yeah, like you said, Cornelius and Flowers. So you had Cornelius playing, I don't know, somewhere around 85% of the actual quarterback snaps last week, had 27 attempts to Flowers just 7. They both looked bad out there. no interest in either of them from a DFS perspective. But I would say the one thing from the passing game that did stand out was the fact that Reese Horn actually ended up seeing some work after not seeing work week one. So maybe that's something that falls over to this week. So you had Reese Horn seeing 5 receptions, 51 yards. He had the 8 targets out there. And the thing that stands out the most was he actually ran 35 routes last week, which is one of the most in the entire XFL. So you ended up seeing Dan Williams take a backseat, just 24 routes run, Tolliver just 27. So this week, at the price points that like Dan Williams is at wide receiver, I just can't get there, especially with Murray, who he showed connection with week one not being in. But I'm fine getting to Reese Horn and Tolliver. If you just want to base it off last week, I think Horn looks fine, but they're both seeing a good amount of work, and really it comes down to being a price play. The thing that also stands out probably the most when you're just talking about Truesdale running as a slot guy, the guy who saw the most routes out of the slot last week was Reese Horn. 34 of his 35 snaps and routes run were out of the slot, so he's going to see even more work now with no Truesdale in the middle of the field.
Are you willing to stack anybody with Cornelius? Because, generally in DFS, it's always a good idea to buy when there's blood in the streets on a guy when he just seems like he's due for positive regression. But with a guy like Cornelius, who just looks so bad, I mean, he was inaccurate. He had a 63% accuracy rating, completed only 59% of passes. I just don't know that he's worth it, and I don't know that he actually has a median projection that's worthwhile, but at his price point and with some of these receivers looking pretty cheap and also very likely to play from behind against Houston, does seem like there's theoretical opportunity. Do you see having any Cornelius stacked with these guys, or is it just take the one-offs and hope that maybe they excel in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to end up taking the one-offs here. We'll talk about a quarterback who's cheaper that I would have somewhat interest in punting if you really needed the salary there, but it's just not going to be Cornelius there. You have the downside of him leaving just the field in the red zone if they bring in Flowers for some type of running plays, bringing in Flowers for 25% of the plays, just hit your upside anyways. And yeah, he did look really bad last week. His senior year of college, he was fine, but judging based off of just last week alone, just not the type of guy that I think has a GPP upside.
We should talk about the run game fast here. It did seem more like a direct timeshare. I think they actually had an even split count with De'Veon Smith and Jacques Patrick in week 2, which a bit of a surprise given that Smith looked pretty competent in week 1. But both guys have actually looked pretty good running the ball. 3.9 yards after contact for De'Veon Smith, 4.3 for Jacques Patrick. Patrick, both of them actually pretty big-bodied guys, so they're kind of similar looking backs when they're out there on the field. But with the timeshare split, I mean, I guess you could take Patrick for the discount, but do you like either of these running backs, knowing that they are getting decent workloads, but they are very firmly sharing the load with at least one other guy?
Yeah, I think it ends up being, for me, Patrick, just because of the almost $2,000 discount. And yeah, so they both played 51% of the snaps last week, were on the field together for 2 plays. Tampa Bay ended up running 72 offensive plays, maybe just a factor of playing from behind, but 72 offensive plays, ranked 3rd on the week. So that was good to see, and they ended up both seeing good usage. So I'll take Patrick at this point just because of the discount that you're going to get on him. You also end up getting just a lot of usage in the passing game. So both of these running backs have been using the passing game, which is good to see. So ending up last week seeing Patrick run, pulling it up here, you saw Patrick run around 14 routes last week, 15 for De'Veon Smith. So that's around a little bit above the league average usage for each of the guys on the same team. So I think you have some upside there in the passing game. If you tell me that they each see 10 carries, I'll just take the guy who's cheaper.
Yep, I think that seems fair. And yeah, Patrick is substantially cheaper. So, I think that's perfectly fine logic to go to him. But it does seem like a game where Houston should be able to put up points, even if Tampa Bay does kind of stifle them a little bit. She'll be a spot here where they're going to need to pass more than run, one would think. But, they've been committed to the run, so we'll see. Let's keep going down the slate here. And guys, hit the like button as well. XFL, the viewership for these not quite as high as some of the other shows we have out there. So we need the support of you guys who are watching this as you're watching it, whether you're watching it live or after the fact. So help us out. Hit the like button. And, of course, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell to know whenever we go live here. And these shows will be on Fridays moving forward, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So keep watching us every Friday. We break down all the goodness in the XFL. Game 2 here, Sal. We got Dallas getting 4.5 points on the road. Actually, they are a 4.5 point favorite, on the road against Seattle. Seattle, very hapless team here. Dallas, 23.8 implied points. Seattle, 19.3. Dallas kind of exploded last week in a meaningful way against LA in a game that was pretty competitive. Cameron Artis-Payne emerged in a big way after he disappointed a lot of people in week 1. Landry Jones also looked very competent out there. Donald Parham, top targeted guy, but Jeff Badette was also more in the mix. And Jazz Ferguson, a delightful last-minute scratch that I think nobody knew about until he actually was out of the game. So great fun there. But Dallas looked good, Sal. Are you feeling them this week going against a Seattle team who has offered very little so far defensively?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces from this Dallas team that stands out. Jones kind of gets lost, and I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up just not picking up a lot of ownership, getting lost around Cardell's price point, Walker up there, Teamu, who we saw for 2 weeks now be a very consistent quarterback, the highest scoring quarterback last week. So I think Landry Jones is an interesting GPP play. He has been the first and only quarterback to go over 300 yards in the XFL last week, and they ran 74 plays on offense. So that was encouraging, the second most in the league. You see Seattle through 2 weeks, their secondary is ranked seventh in the league. The one thing that stood out from Jones was just in his first game back, and it makes sense to not have as much touch on your passes and just chemistry with your receivers, but he went 1 for 6 with an interception on deep passes. I expect that to just slightly improve, especially with the matchup. It was really just a short passing clinic for Dallas, and that's what they want to do in this air raid offense. So it provides upside for Jones. Not the most mobile quarterback compared to these other guys up here, so that's one concern and knock on him. But for the pass catchers that he's going to have, Badette and Parm both left the game last week just for a couple plays each, but they practiced in full yesterday. They should be good to go. Those are the two guys who stand out a lot. I think they're both underpriced on this slate. I think they're both pretty strong options. On the season, you've had Badette runs 63 routes, Parm runs 60. Parm's primarily working as a slot wide receiver for about 3/4 of his routes right now. And you saw last week 11 targets. It was 13 if you count 2 plays that got called back, targeted toward Parm. So there was just a lot of eyes from Landry Jones looking for Donald Parm. So I think he stands out as one of the more underpriced players in the slate. And then Jeff Badette, they're not going to be deep targets as they were in the AAF for him, but he had 2 last week. He'll have his opportunities there. But if you're going to just see that much usage and that much plays, a lot of guys are going to end up just being in play.
Yeah, Parm, I think, is a really interesting play this week. I mean, he's going to jump out because of the targets being that high, one of the highest target marks in the league last week. But he's getting a matchup. Well, I guess he and Flynn Nagel both will get a matchup against Steve Williams in the slot. He's been pretty bad so far in covering the slot, giving up 1.9 yards per coverage snap. Also giving up about 6.5 targets per game to the slot. So I do think one of these guys can have a day. I think Nagel's kind of the most obvious pivot if you wanted to go to Parham, if you think Parham's going to be owned. And I do think my gut instinct tells me that he's going to be at least a bit owned here. Do you have any interest in Nagel at all, given that he is running more routes out of the slot, just not really getting the targets so far, and he's definitely not a guy who's got a lot of speed where you're expecting him to break one at any moment?
Yeah, so he's a really interesting play because the price point went down. It's just a matter of like upside for him. So when you factor in just looking for a pivot play, I think he looks good. He's actually ran the third most routes on the entire XFL. He's ran 69 routes. There's just no chemistry last week with Jones. He ended up being in a spot where he played on the most snaps on the entire team outside of Landry Jones, 82% of the snaps. So the opportunity with him on the field is great. The way that this offense sets up, they only threw deep 6 times in that game on 74 offensive plays. It sets up nicely for him. The good matchup there. So price point coming down. Yeah, I think he looks like a strong contrarian GPP option. He just ends up being like the third or fourth option from this team that I have interest in. So it makes it more difficult to get there. But there's no question that he can just see a spike performance of a 6-7 target game the way that this offense runs.
So we talked about how we weren't willing to pay as much for James Butler on Houston, and it does seem like Cameron Artis-Payne at the price point would be a guy I'd be much more willing to pay for. We did see the disappointment in week 1, but I guess in week 2, we really did see the ability that we knew was there that he just didn't quite get to in that first matchup. But, different quarterback as well, certainly going to open things up a bit. Philip Nelson, we talked about that last week, just a dude who was terrified to throw. Landry Jones, despite his, Sal mentioned some of his failings on the deep ball, was more willing to throw the ball, definitely more confident in the pocket. I think there is a trickle down for Cameron Artis-Payne here. You got to assume Cameron Artis-Payne is going to be owned, though, after he was really one of few backs to emerge in a meaningful way. Lance Dunbar's workload still comparable. The snap share definitely favoring Artis-Payne. Are you feeling Artis-Payne? Is he worth the price point, or do you think it's a week to maybe go back to Lance Dunbar?
Yeah, so the issue for him is, he looked great. And the big thing of note is that Dallas in week 1 had 4 running backs play 14 or more snaps. This past week, Austin Walter and Marquise Young, the third and fourth string running backs, only played 4 combined snaps. So there's just much more usage for Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar to go around. Artis-Payne leads the entire league for running backs in routes run. Dunbar's number 3. So these backs in Dallas are being used just very adequately. You have Lance Dunbar leading the entire XFL for running back routes out of the slot at 13. That's good to see. You're seeing him also pick up 12 targets so far. So the usage is good there. The issue is they're priced up at this point. So I much prefer and just would rather get to just 4 wide receivers and prioritize those guys before prioritizing Dunbar, Artis-Payne's price points, just because of how inconsistent the running games can be. Both of these guys, the way that they're used in the passing game, it is encouraging. I would prefer Dunbar since he's a little bit cheaper this week. I expect Artis-Payne's ownership to go back up. if it sticks to just being two running backs, you can see another spike performance. But he had 3 rush attempts of 15 or more yards in this game alone. In the XFL this entire year, nobody has more than one. The offensive line play is just not great overall or consistent in the entire league. So paying up for him this week is probably something I won't do. I'll lean to go to Dunbar here, but I'll just prioritize wide receivers over running backs this week.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. I guess I might be a little more bullish on Artis Payne, which can be a trap point. I think your point about paying for wide receivers does seem more logical. It's like there's some way there's probably going to be some value wide receiver who we can get to. There's a little bit of the value has been squeezed out as we've gotten in a couple weeks here. But Artis Payne, I just feel like the workload's there. The matchup is pretty strong. Seattle really doesn't have anybody who can stop the run in a meaningful way. They're not getting stops on an individual level. They're graded as a 62 grade run defense by PFF. I guess the issue is that Dallas really not running a lot, despite the big results last week from Artis Payne. This is just me thinking out loud, but I think you raised some interesting points here. Artis Payne definitely going to be highly owned. Maybe could be a bit of a trap, but just based on talent and the opportunity, it does seem like he's a dude who's worthwhile. Let's go to Seattle's side because this team is really not good. Last week, Austin Proehl had a bit of a hip issue, so he saw less routes than he did in week 1. Keenan Reynolds took advantage, but most of that came on one deep ball. Reynolds does not look like a pro receiver in any level, just a slow guy. He is a converted quarterback, option quarterback from Navy, so, he can only expect so much. But low catch rate for him on the year. Getting the deep targets, though, Brandon Silver is also not a good quarterback, but a guy who also should be playing from behind this week. How do you feel about Seattle's pass game? Do you think there's any upside for him, or are you willing to go back to Reynolds, or you want to go to Proehl? How do you feel about him?
Yeah, so I think the best thing to be said for Reynolds, so Seattle's been playing from behind, and I mentioned it earlier. I think Brandon Silvers is the only guy below, like in that 7K range of quarterbacks. He's like the only cheaper quarterback that I have that much interest in this week, and it's really only because of the aggressiveness of this offense. He's thrown the second most deep passes in the league. You have 2 of his wide receivers in Bird and Reynolds right now leading the league with 6 deep targets of 20 plus yards each. So there's at least upside there. Again, he's like my 5th favorite, I guess you can say, quarterback option this week. So I don't know how much I get there, but if you want to play Artis Payne in the top end wide receivers, you're going to need to get down at quarterback. So I think he's at least in play because of just the price matchup. Dallas ranks dead last in coverage through 2 weeks and 7th in pass rush. So it's as good of a matchup as it'll get, at least for him. But when it goes to the wide receivers, it's really hard to like anything here. If anything, it would be Keenan Reynolds, just because right now he sits at number 2 in air yards in the league. And number 2 in air yards, but he's had 8 less targets than Nelson Spruce, who's number 1 in air yards. So just a ton of deep targets at this point for him. The concern is just the price point going up and the consistency of this offense. Kayson Williams has been ruled out. This is now a 3rd straight week, so he's been listed as the starter on the depth chart. We have still yet to see him. I thought that might be maybe a little bit of an edge on this slate if he was to play, and not a lot of people noticed it. But I don't want to go back to Proehl in the slot, who did nothing last week after having kind of a fluky week 1. The passing game here is just Reynolds for me, but like you mentioned it, I think that long touchdown last week, again, somewhat not much consistency behind that. I'll probably avoid much of this team.
Yeah, Reynolds getting the looks, as Sal mentioned, Silvers is throwing it, but he's just not good. I mean, he's got a 15% deep completion rate so far. His accuracy overall is just at 56%, one of the lowest marks in the league. He just doesn't look like a dude who's ready for prime time. That said, he does have to throw, so maybe he creates some opportunity. It's hard to pay the prices, though, on Proehl and Reynolds, just knowing the general talent level of these guys. And, it's not a good team here for Seattle, but the running backs actually do look pretty good, but it is a 3-man committee fully there. These guys' snap shares have been pretty close to even. Kenneth Farrow leading the way a little bit overall, it looks like, but still not a guy that there's just not enough volume for him to get there at his current price point. But you have any interest in these guys at all, Sal, for Seattle? Maybe Trey Williams, a little more pass game work for him?
Yeah, I mean, Trey Williams, like you said, is the only guy who ran routes last week. He had a reception for, I think, -4 yards. But yeah, it's just a 3-headed backfield. Like they pretty much all played 30% of the snaps. Nobody played above 37%. Williams had 12 touches, Farrow 10, and Gardner 10 last week. So none of them are that interesting to me. If you wanted to just punt with one of them, I would just take the cheapest in Gardner at 3,800 because they're probably all in line for 8 to 12 touches. And I'm sure somebody will fall into the end zone eventually. But punting with Gardner is the only thing that seems somewhat appealing here. But yeah, no strong interest in the backfield.
Yeah, and it also is worth noting Dallas's run defense has been one of the best ones in the league, 83 grade from PFF for them. So it should be a spot where even if these guys, get any sort of results here, or even get any sort of rather just touches more than usual, it's going to be not a great spot for them to actually do much with it. Just a tough situation for Seattle. Really, probably the least appealing team, I'd say, overall to target. Just my gut instinct. Let's go to game 3 here. We got New York heading into a match with St. Louis. New York 10-point dogs on the road. Matt McGloin looked god awful last week, but really everything just didn't work for New York in that spot. They recovered well. DC's guys, we kind of talked about it last week where Joe Horn, I thought, was a bit of a trap. He projected well. He was a guy who was targeted well in week 1, but the slot matchup there against DC was not a good one. This week, it's kind of a different story where they're getting St. Louis. Darius Hillary, a guy we pointed out last week, has been giving up a lot to the slot so far. They are a good team. Like St. Louis's defense, I think, is pretty strong in terms of their just being able to wrap guys up, being able to do the basic football tenets that you want to see, but they're still not great talent-wise in that secondary. Are you willing to go back to Matt McGloin like I am this week, Sal? Because I just see the opportunity for him. I know he's getting to throw it. He's been god-awful. He's been Brandon Silver's bad overall, and he's got to hold off Marquise Williams, and I think that's something that maybe gives him a bit of an oomph here. Going into St. Louis, they're going to be trailing. I just feel like people won't be on McGloin, but I think the ability's there for him to do something this week. Do you agree, or are you running away from him?
I think I'm going to run away from it. I see what you're doing. I saw your the article yesterday. It was really good. I like the idea of getting contrarian by going to somebody who just nobody wants to play, and there's at least upside, and they do attempt like 6-7 deep passes a game. But the concern for McGloin right now is just the offense that's around him. And like you saw him last week kind of voice out, probably shouldn't have done that, but the concerns are very much there. Like they're running the play clock down on every single play as if it's the fourth quarter with a lead. They only ran 49 plays last week, 59 the week before that. Just for reference, St. Louis ran 88 plays last week, like almost 40 more plays than them. So they're just running right now at a snail's pace, and it's hard to get excited in that when it's almost a guarantee that 3 or 4 of these other more premier quarterbacks, who are also more expensive, but more premier quarterbacks in this league, are going to run 25 more offensive plays on average, 20 more than what they did last week. So that's a concern right now, just the pace of play that they're playing at. The weapons around him aren't that great. I do think that McCall McKay is going to have 1 to 2 huge weeks this year. He's been targeted a ton. I believe he's currently top 4 in air yards in the league. The problem is he's been overthrown twice by McGloin, who just doesn't have any deep ball accuracy at this point. And the quarterback play hasn't been great, and it can only get worse if Marquise Williams goes behind there, a really good rushing upside quarterback, but doesn't bring much when it comes to passing. So I'm just a little bit down on the whole offense, but so is the entire probably industry at this point. So I think it's at least, if you do play them, it's not like you're doing it for ownership purposes. And at that point, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I mean, the offense, and I think the establish the run guys have talked about it at some length coming into the year with Kevin Gilbride just voicing general concerns. I feel like Silva in particular was very down on him and his kind of nepotistic approach and how he's gotten a lot of his work. I do believe, I think you're right. The offenses look bad, but I do know he's taking deep shots. I mean, he's throwing it deep 5 times a game. Marquise Williams came in. He threw it a handful of deep throws as well. Like, I think there's the opportunity for them to do something, whether they can actually execute or not. And going against a St. Louis team who's been one of the more competent ones in the league, I do think, there's definitely risk. But for me, if McGloin's going to be, let's say, 10% owned, I just want to get a little bit above that because I think, the guy's been this bad. He is still a pro quarterback. He was an NFL quarterback. I think he's got to be better than this. Like, I believe in McGloin regressing to the mean a little bit more than I do Brandon Silvers, but I think your points are all well-founded, and I will fully admit my mistake when Matt McGloin gets pulled in the first quarter and then Marquise Williams goes nuts because he's actually an exciting player. Matt McGloin is, I got to say though, got to respect McGloin for throwing a team under the bus there. Like, if you're going to talk honestly, you're going to interview players, like that's the kind of stuff I want to see. Do you agree on that, Sal, or do you think he should have just kept it to himself?
I mean, if I'm him, I probably wouldn't have said that. But yeah, if I'm the viewer, that's exactly
a little
what
more tactful, maybe. Like, I think might have been the approach.
Yeah.
He's keeping it real. Like, that's what I feel like that's the advantage this team has, or this league has, is like get these guys when the moment things go south, and then if they say something soundbite worthy, like, if that happened in the NFL, could you imagine a week of ESPN headlines? It would just be insane.
Oh yeah, exactly. And that's the crazy part about it is, like, I was going to say maybe the XFL is just paying these guys like an extra grand to do something crazy for media attention under the table. But no, yeah, it's just all emotions in it. I think Nelson Spruce scored a touchdown, like a deep touchdown. They tried to interview him and he was like out of breath. And they were like, "Can you describe that play?" He said, "Got open, touchdown." And he just kept walking.
I enjoy it. Like, I think the access to the players is one thing that, like, the games feel like they're moving faster because of the running clock and all that. But just like the constant in between, it's obviously not DFS related, but one of the reasons I enjoy watching the XFL right now is that, like, I'm paying half attention sometimes, and then I'll hear a guy talking, like, oh, cool. Like, everything's moving to segment after segment of guys talking. And I feel like that's been one thing I appreciated. So Matt McGloin, I'm on your side and I'll play you for your candor, if nothing else. running backs here, Sal. Darius Victor got concussed early in that game last week. Tim Cook took the workload. I thought Victor looked pretty good in the few snaps that he got, and he's looked good overall in the year. Still a spot, though, I'm not sure I want to get to New York's run game here. If I'm taking the risk, I'm taking the risk with the pass game. But do you see any opportunity here for Victor or Cook? Do you have any of these guys in your lineups?
Yeah, so Victor, it's a head injury. I don't think they didn't label it as a concussion, so he practiced in full.
Okay.
I was going to have interest in Tim Cook if there was no Victor, but now it's just sort of a toss up between these guys. Like if you're trying to punt with guys below $5,000 or even $6,000, there's like 2 or 3 viable options this week. And I think a lot of people's lineups will just have them there. So we talked about Patrick. I think both of these New York backs, we saw Victor week 1 have just a nice workload. He ran more routes than Tim Cook. I actually do have interest in Victor, especially since he was on the injury report all week. Still $4,700. I'll have some interest in getting there.
Yeah, I think Victor's looked good, and Justin Stockton still kind of lurks for these guys. Though actually, was he released? Because I see Matt Coburn now on the list, but
I think so. Yeah, this is something that I want to see. I saw that last week he was like a healthy scratch, and Colbert was the guy who was on the team. I saw some report come out about Stockton. I don't know if it was him being released or him being active this week, but yeah, as of right now, I think he's like 4th string.
He's
At
still
best.
he's still on the roster, I guess. But yeah, he's a guy who does feel like maybe could steal some touches in coming weeks, but he hasn't yet. So it does look like a 2-man backfield right now. And I agree, like Victor, I think has some upside, but how much in this New York offense remains to be seen. St. Louis, though, last week, we talked about Jordan Tamu at great lengths. He really came through in a big way. He was a top quarterback, did the rushing thing that he does, but not quite as well as in week 1. But the passing game, I mean, for him, what jumps off the page to me, accuracy for him, 86%. And granted, they were playing it very close to the vest with him on St. Louis. No deep throws really at all. He's only got a 1.5 per game so far. So he's not really throwing the ball deep downfield in any meaningful way, but he doesn't have to right now. St. Louis is looking good. They lost that game against Houston, but I think they were a team who came in, according to Vegas, very undervalued, looked like they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league. I think they're one of the top 2 or 3 teams right now. I don't know this matchup, though, against New York. I think you need New York to get something going to push St. Louis into action more, but I do like going to the pass catchers here. Pearson L jumps out to me as well. Pretty good slot matchup for him, a guy we pointed out last week who did get killed in the slot for most of the game when he had to. Drayvon Askew-Henry, just a bad guy in the slot, just not good at covering at all. Jamar Summers actually pretty good outside. So I do think it's a nice spot here for Pearson L to get going. I don't know that I trust LaDainian Washington to keep going what he did last week. I think that was a bit of an aberration, a bit of a result of the pass game having to go off against Houston. But Sal, what do you think about the pass game here? Are you with me that Pearson L is the option? But I guess at the price point, still going to be a tough price to pay for him.
Yeah, I just don't know if I'm going to get there because of the price point. He'll probably not pick up as much ownership compared to Phillips and Spruce, but I just rather go to those 2 guys and at this point seems like more pass friendly offenses. So St. Louis right now, they're just running a ton of plays, which is a factor of last week playing from behind and just having a lot of time of possession. Had 88 plays run, is ridiculous, 14 more than the next closest team in Dallas, but they're running the ball a ton. So far this year through 2 games, they're seeing about 55% of their plays being running plays, which is the complete opposite of most of this league, which is throwing the ball like 60 to 65% of the time. So that's a little bit of a concern when it comes to the passing game when their price points are coming up. And now you get a matchup where they should be, at least based on Vegas's odds right now, they should be pretty much in a position to run as much as they want as touchdown favorites, 7.5 points against New York. So I'm a little bit concerned about the passing game. That's why I don't want to go all the way up for Pearson L. You see Washington's price point almost double in a couple weeks. So I'm just probably not going to get to this passing game as much. The running game looks a little bit more appealing. Teamu, just due to his rushing upside, I still think is in play. It's just a concern now that they're all priced up. And I think that the game flow can easily go that they run the ball 60% of the time next week or this week.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And certainly if New York doesn't push them into action, there's going to be less need for them to do anything besides run the ball. And they are running at a very high rate, running 55% of the time so far. I guess that as we're talking about the running game then, Matt Jones and Christine Michael, both heavily involved last week. Michael got his touches up. Jones still as involved as he's been. It does seem like there's possibly a bit of logic to go to Michael at his price point because the backfield a little bit closer to split, kind of what we thought we'd see in week 1. I don't know that I love Matt Jones this week, but the workload's there, and I feel like people may see the box score for Michael and think, oh yeah, it's like probably better to take the cheaper guy. So that's kind of where I'm stuck with it, Sal. How are you feeling about Jones and Michael, and which would you trust more?
Yeah, so I think they both look very similar to each other. But then when you factor in price, I just like Michael more similar to Devion Smith and Patrick for Tampa Bay. Jones, both of these running backs have been very ineffective. They both rank outside the top 10. There's only 8 teams in the league outside the top 10 in elusive rating. They both have exactly 24 routes run, which is around average at this point for running backs. So at least good to see their use there. Michael played 49% of the snaps last week. I would just take Michael because of the price discount you get on him. They each had 17 touches. It's just an offense where you're going to get fed volume at this point. It was nice to see that they really only used 2 running backs last week yet again. So for the price discount, I'll end up taking Michael Jones. He had the 25-yard touchdown reception last week, but outside of that, he was highly ineffective.
I guess the question here, and we kind of talked about this last week, and it did end up being a thing where the tournament winners, for the most part, did double stack with Temu. But are you going to Jordan Temu this week? Are you willing to go back to him, or is, for the reasons you mentioned with the pass catchers and just maybe him needing to be forced into action a bit less, is he a guy who's off your radar with his price now up after he had the big week?
Yeah, I think that's the issue for him. So like he's in a player pool right now for me, but it's just where the price points of his receivers are. Like if you're paying for an expensive receiver, I'd rather have Walker with Phillips because there's just more pairing options there. Or you can have Cardell Jones with the 3 receivers that he has that are all appropriately priced. So I think that's what's going to keep Ta'amu down for me. We didn't see as much rushing upside from him last week. I don't know if that was by design or not, but week 1 he had a good amount of design runs. So it's a situation where the price point's now up. So even if you get the rushing upside out of him in this type of a matchup, if he goes out there and has 18, 20 fantasy points, there's probably going to be the other 3 guys above him in that range, and they just correlate better with their receivers. So it's just less that you have to get right to win a tournament. So I think although Tam was in a player pool for me, he might be one of my lower owned QBs.
I feel like last week it was just that Houston. I mean, the one thing that Houston's really done is bringing a lot of pressure, and I felt like he just didn't have the lanes to run. I don't know that it was a game plan thing as much. My gut instinct would be like it was not as much of a game plan thing. But maybe against New York, I mean, if he's seeing tight coverage on the outside, I do think that there's potential here for, I don't know, for maybe him to run a little bit more. But I mostly agree, though. I do think he was really forced into action into that game, had to throw a lot more than I think St. Louis would like to. If New York doesn't push the action in a meaningful way, I mean, it does seem like they are going to have a hard time doing that if they look like they did last week. It does seem like a spot where Tamu is going to have a hard time reaching the upside, even though his floor probably as strong as anybody out there because of the rushing that he's going to do. Let's keep going here to the last game. DC heading into Los Angeles. DC an 8.5-point favorite on Los Angeles, despite being on the road here. Los Angeles looked much more competent last week, but still defensively, they might be the worst defense in the league, at least on par with Seattle for sure. Really didn't do anything to stop Dallas last week. DC looked like one of the more competent teams overall. Cardale Jones, Sal mentioned him earlier, but has looked like the best QB in the league just in terms of being professional. Maybe not the best fantasy QB, but a guy who's not going to kill you and probably will have more upside in games that are competitive, though he hasn't really been in any that are meaningfully competitive so far. How are you feeling about this DC offense here? To me, Eli Rogers looks like a really strong play this week, but his price is up, and I don't know that it's easy to get there, kind of the same as Pearson L.
Yeah, I really like this DC offense. So I personally think just when you factor in special teams and defense that they're probably the best team in the XFL right now, but this offense looks great. So Cardell Jones, they're operating just really effectively, and he's like the best quarterback for it in this league. He's been faced with pressure the most out of anybody in the league, so a little bit on the offensive line there, but he's had the most time to throw because of that, just scrambling. Best completion percentage, even with that. So pretty crazy. Adjusted completion percentage at 80%. He's number 1 in deep ball accuracy, most play action pass attempts by 9. So when you have just play action, it's going to just correlate to just more deep ball success. So yeah, it's a spot this week where you're facing a team that doesn't really stand out in terms of defense being that elite. Again, after week 1, fired a defensive coordinator. Cardell Jones looks just really safe, I would say. It's hard to see what his upside is. He's not rushing all that much. Upside in terms of can he hit that 30-point ceiling like we saw the first 2 weeks from Philip Walker and Tamu. But I think he's a really strong play to just get you somewhere around the low to mid 20s in fantasy points really every week out there. And I think the receivers are the most appealing receiving core when it comes to just stacking 2 of them up with the quarterback on the entire slate. Right now, DeAndre Tompkins, he returned last week. He ended up playing just 64% of the snaps, but he was highly effective. Again, we talked about it earlier, but I have him for like 67 receiving yards, 68. They ruled him for 92 for some reason, but he was targeted often, 9 targets. He ended up having 2 drops actually, so he was really in play the whole time. I think he's one of the cheaper priced guys in this slate that seems underpriced. But then Eli Rogers seems consistent, top 10 in routes run, 3rd most slot targets. gets a nice matchup against Mike Stevens this week. If you want to play the Twitter narrative, Rashad Ross was traded from LA, and he said, I think it was like hashtag on my daddy or something, that he's going to get revenge from them. He literally said, like, I'm going to get revenge. So he ran 26 routes. Malachi Dupree seems to have fallen from the number 1 receiver week 1 to the number 4 receiver now, and maybe not even in the rotation soon. So you get Ross right now with 4 deep receptions at 20 plus yards. That's 2 more than anybody else in the league. He's number 1 in yards per route run. So if his snaps are coming up in this offense that is using play action, is effective with deep passing with Cardell, I think Rashad Ross right now stands out as like one of the best GPP plays on the slate.
Which 2 guys would you favor here? Because I do think Eli Rogers, I mean, we kind of saw in that first drive, and Eli Rogers also, I guess, a shout out or maybe some quiet judgment for him missing his mother's funeral to be at that game, which I respect. I mean, like, for all we know, his mom might have been like, this is your dream. Go out there, baby, go play. But really dedicated to the league in a way that I was impressed by. And he looked great in that first drive, was catching every ball. Then the game just got out of hand. DC really didn't have to do much after the first few drives of that game. They could sense New York just really wilting and under the pressure there. But Rodgers getting that work, getting the slot matchup you mentioned with Mike Stevens, who looks good. I would favor, I think, Rodgers and Tompkins, but I think you make a fair point about Ross and how productive he's been. And it does seem like Ross could start to slowly chip away a little bit from Tompkins' opportunity. Which 2 would you favor if you were going to stack them? Obviously, rotating all 3 of these core guys in seems like the move here. But if you had to choose, Sal, it's just 2 guys. I'll put you on the spot. Who would they be?
Yeah, so Tompkins would be one no matter what, just because of the price point and what it allows you to do since Cardell is expensive. If we're talking cash, I would go Rodgers, but GPPs, I'll go Rashad Ross and DeAndre Tompkins there. Just the upside for Ross, he ended up seeing 5 more routes run this past week. I think he'll see even more as he said in a post-game report that he feels good about his role in the offense. He knows the book. So I think that it's a spot where this offense just plays so perfectly for downfield passing. He hasn't taken a single snap out of the slot. He's just running wind sprints right now. And eventually it's just going to hit for like a 2 touchdown game.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. Yeah, Ross definitely going to have that GPP upside. He is lovingly compared to Tyreek Hill for a reason by some of the people who were analyzing the AAF last year and talking about him in the preseason. But yeah, Tompkins, it did seem like, I mean, he was really getting targeted heavily. The target share for him is looking about as good as it can look. And yeah, I probably would agree with you. I do think Rodgers and Tompkins I'll have a little bit more of than Ross just because the roles seem a little bit more secure. But Ross definitely should be in the mix. And I think just rotating those 3 guys, if you are going to stack with Cardale, I think is a pretty good move. Donnell Pumphrey in the run game seemed like he took over a little bit more from Jarrell Presley. Both guys still involved, but Presley really hasn't looked as good as he did in the AAF so far. Could be a bit of a symptom of DC, and Pumphrey a little bit more versatile, is getting targeted more in the pass game. And I think the guys still overall, the talent gap doesn't seem that big. So I don't know that I would trust Pumphrey at his elevated price. But how do you feel about these guys, Sal? Do you want any of the running backs or no?
Yeah, I mean, it was at least nice to see Pumphrey break away like somewhat last week in terms of just in terms of overall touches. So he still played just 51% of the snaps, though. He is only one of the 5 running backs in the league to run at least 30 routes this year. He has ran 8 routes out of the slot, so second to Lance Dunbar as a running back. The concern is just the price point, and it does seem like they want to move forward with Pumphrey as a guy who plays the majority of the snaps. He's the majority of the passing down work over Presley. So if anything, I would get to Pumphrey from this backfield. He's in a player pool right now for me, but he's probably like the first guy to get out of it just due to price point. So yeah, it's just really tough this is a really full-blown running back by committee. It's tough to want to commit at these price points.
Yeah, I would agree. Pumphrey definitely got a little more PPR upside, it seems, how they used him last week. But at his price point, I mean, if you're going to go up there, I think we'd go to some of the other guys a little more expensive. Or as Sal's mentioned several times, to go down to some of the value guys might be the move. Presley, just to me, also looks just mispriced, given that was much less involved, even though the snap share was there for him again. Him getting bumped down to not the starter just seems like he's moving in the wrong direction overall. How about this Los Angeles side, Sal? Because they did look more competent with Josh Johnson in the mix. Playing a DC defense, who we talked about, is pretty competent overall, but I think Los Angeles is going to be feisty in a lot of these games. I don't know that they're good because of that defense being so bad, but it does seem like they have to throw here, and it also does seem like the slot matchup for Nelson Spruce is going to be a crucial one because he's going to be owned again. He's priced in those Christian McCaffrey kind of levels. How are you feeling about Josh Johnson first, and are you willing to go back to him stacked with Spruce, given that Spruce is now going to be a very expensive stack target?
Yeah, I think that so This is, I think, the most difficult decision on the entire slate for me, at least, and it's really what to make of Josh Johnson. So last week, well, first of all, I think he's facing the best defense in the league. They're number 2 in pressure rate and number 1 in coverage through 2 weeks. So I think they're the most complete. So that's a knock on him. But he's priced down compared to all these other guys. You didn't see any urgency for him to use his mobility last week, which kind of leads me to believe that maybe he's favoring his injury still a little bit. But he does have, in theory, the rushing upside, and you've seen it. He was 1 of 7 on deep passing, similar to Landry Jones' first game back. Just really didn't have the touch pass or chemistry with the receivers. But if you're talking about just stacking him with a guy like Spruce, yeah, I think that makes sense. He's cheaper. Um, I'm concerned about the matchup for him from what we've seen from DC. They just have probably the best defensive line in this league. But I think that he's at least interesting for GPPs. He's the one like piece for me on the week that I'm having a hard time pinning down if I want to get to a lot of him or just like none at all.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I mean, just when you see those 7 deep targets he threw, I mean, there's just more theoretical opportunity to unlock. And I also think too, I mean, Spruce did get some of the deep looks, but Adonis Jennings getting a lot of the looks, like he was really spreading it out pretty well. Where that does freak me out a little bit. That I think Johnson, like clearly Spruce is the top target. He's getting the most targets. He's been the most targeted receiver in the league overall. But I worry a little bit that Johnson may be more willing to be agnostic towards Spruce otherwise. And you might see some of these guys like, I don't think Blacknall is going to be in, but maybe Smallwood or Jennings go off. Are you willing to play Johnson not stacked with Spruce? Because I'll tell you, that's going to be a very contrarian tournament build, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll be very contrarian. It's just hard for me to want to get away just from the track record that you've seen with Spruce in the AAF and here. He's been with like 4 different quarterbacks and they just all eye him down at this point. His separation, we don't have any numbers on it, but I'm just assuming it's fantastic if all different levels of quarterbacks skill wise are looking towards him. So I like in terms of just paying up for quarterback or wide receivers between Pearson L and Phillips. I like getting to Spruce the most. You also get somewhat of a price discount off of Phillips. So I'm probably gonna have a lot of Spruce. So wherever I do have Jack Johnson, I'll probably end up just getting to Spruce. But it's interesting to see what happens with these other guys. Yeah, you touched on Blacknall and McBride have both been limited this week in practice. Blacknall ran the 43 routes week 1, 4 targets, no receptions. McBride is somebody that they traded for Rashad Ross, was drafted early in the XFL draft back in the summer. So those are guys that will have just no ownership on them, and it's uncertain if there's a connection with the quarterback. But when it comes to GPPs, if they're active, I think like if you get McBride active in this one, and there's news that he won't be limited, I think it's worth taking some stabs on it.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be, who do you think gets squeezed out there? My gut would say that it's Jennings, just because he's
Yeah,
really not the most talented, and Smallwood's been running the most routes. But yeah, so you agree on that? It would be probably Jennings getting squeezed for McBride.
yeah, I think it would be Jennings because so Nelson Spruce is pretty much running primarily as like a slot wide receiver at this point, and yeah, Smallwood is the guy that they keep out there on the outside. On the flip side of that, though, like if you get Saeed Blacknall and Trey McBride both ruled out, then Jennings is just $3,000, and he doesn't look great, but he did run 28 routes, saw a couple of targets last week. So if you do want to just play all the top end receivers, Cameron Sardin Payne, Philip Walker, whatever quarterbacks in the 10K range, then Jennings is just a way to unlock that a little bit easier.
Yeah, I would agree there. So yeah, definitely want to watch the injury report, and it is the last game on the slate though, so we may not have any great news updates before that. But definitely some opportunity for Los Angeles, a team who's a gigantic home underdog, going against a DC team who I think did shut down New York, but I think Los Angeles with Josh Johnson is going to be more competitive than New York was. One quick thing, Sal, here, defenses, any of them jump out to you? Because we don't talk much defense in the XFL because I think we haven't had a great read on who's actually going to be valuable. To me, Houston's defense looks like the best play of the week, going against the Taylor Cornelius and Quentin Flowers poo-poo platter, which is literally a poo-poo platter. Not looking good at all. And Houston generating really good pressure. I think this is a spot where they can really wreak havoc, maybe do less offensively in that spot. But is there one defense you feel particularly strong about?
Yeah, I think they did a little bit of a better job just pricing up the defenses this week for the quarterback play. Yeah, nothing bad to say about Houston if you can afford it this week. I think it's fine. Cheap defenses, the Battlehawks stand out just from what you saw from New York last week. They play slow. There's obviously issues with just accuracy right now for McGloin and connection with the receivers. So I think the Battlehawks, who right now I think have the number 2 secondary through 2 weeks according to PFF, I think they stand out at 3,700. And then if not getting to them, I think I prefer up top. It's close. Like you just have worse quarterback play against Houston for the Roughnecks going up against Tampa, like you said. So that's what does stand out. But just the defenders' overall defense looks like the most elite unit from getting to the quarterback. And if Josh Johnson isn't going to be mobile, we don't know yet. You're gonna have to just wait and see. I think there's some upside there. You're pretty much banking on touchdowns at this point. So I think Houston, DC, and St. Louis have the best touchdown upside this week.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, guys. So hit the like button. We appreciate that support a bunch, especially for this maiden voyage of me producing. Seems like we made it through it live without any complaints. So good job by us. Thanks for tolerating that, Sal, and for all of you guys watching it. Sal, anything you want to hit on before we call it quits?
No, nothing really. Thanks for producing the show, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
We appreciate you guys watching. Again, hit that like button. Go to osmo.com/join. I'm not sure if the promo code works right now, but if you want to check it out, use the promo code XFL2020. We think it might be going for at least another day or so, but do it right now at osmo.com/join. Basically saves you half off the first month of XFL. And again, we do have the regular player projections and ownership projections now. Ownership projections are not out for the week yet, but they will be coming out in the next few hours. So check them out right now at osmo.com/join with the promo code XFL2020, and go follow Sal at Sal Vetcher DFS. Follow me at Chris Spags. We'll be back with you guys next week, 2 p.m. Eastern time, for another XFL strategy show. So we appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys again soon. And now I